This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. My name is Eben Jansen. Newsroom is streaming live on YouTube as we speak and will do so for the next hour. The entire show can then also be watched on demand on our YouTube channel. Today, we speak exclusively to the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, Tony Leon, ahead of the election. We then take an in-depth look at online statistics on the election, and we'll also get an update from Parliament a little bit later after this week's heated sessions there. But first, let's take a look at the news headlines. South Africans living abroad will continue to vote today ahead of the elections next week. Expats in New Zealand got the ball rolling when they began voting after 9 last night, South African time. Today, it's the turn of South Africans living in the United Kingdom who will be able to cast their ballots at the High Commission in London. Just over 26,000 South Africans have registered to vote abroad. They can only vote in the national election and not the provincial ones. The Electoral Court has ruled that a full inquiry will be held on Friday in an application seeking the resignation of IEC chairperson Pansy Takula. The application was brought by 5 opposition parties who are demanding her resignation ahead of next week's elections. And the Zimbabwean opposition party, the Movement for Democratic Change, has voted to expel party rebels led by Secretary General Tendai Biti, who staged a dramatic bid to oust leader Morgan Tsvangirai over the weekend. The rebel group refused to accept the expulsion, and the matter appears to be headed for the courts. Now, 2014 election campaigning is in full swing. In a week from today, South Africans will be heading to the polls for the 6th time in our 20 years of democratic freedom. Now, for the last couple of weeks, political parties have been out in full force campaigning, using every single opportunity to gain support. One person who's been there and certainly knows what it's all about is former DA leader Tony Leon. He joins us in our Cape Town studio this morning to give us a more personal account of what political parties are going through at this time. Good morning, Mr. Leon. Thank you for joining us.
Morning, Eben. Great to be here.
20 years of freedom this week. I wanted to start our interview by just getting your views on the South Africa that we live in today.
Well, it's a vastly changed place, of course, from what it was in 1994. I was very privileged to be part of that process, and I must say there's almost a balance sheet now between the things that we've got right and the things that have gone wrong. And inevitably, after 2 decades, there's quite a lot on both sides of the balance sheet. But, you know, the fact that we're having our 5th free election in broadly democratic circumstances, and it's very competitive, is, I think, a very good thing. There are very few countries on this continent where you have such a contested poll where in such peaceful circumstances. And I think that is really to the credit not just of our leadership, but really to the people and to the durability of our constitution.
Now, Mr. Leon, the run-up to the election is always quite a roller coaster, as you would know. Just let us into, you know, what would parties be doing in the last days as they run up to the polls next week?
Well, I think there are 3 things, and certainly, you know, this is the first election I'm a non-combatant in. It's quite a pleasant feeling, actually, I must tell you, but since '94. But there really are 3 things. The first is you try and maximize your presence in the run-up to the election, so that you want to be visible, you want to be out there, and of course that hugely favors the bigger parties, the ANC and the DA. It's much more difficult, and the EFF, I would say, it's much more difficult for the smaller parties to get the airtime because they have fewer resources. The second thing you're trying to do, whatever else appears to be on the scene, is to actually maximize your own base. In other words, elections really are about turning out your supporters. It's nice if you can get people to cross the floor, as it were, from other parties to vote for you. But if, for example, 100% of your potential supporters go and vote, you're going to do disproportionately better than the other side. So you actually are spending your time in your own base, even though you might appear to be reaching out to the other side. And the third thing, and perhaps this is the most difficult part of it, is you're worrying about what is out there that might come and trip you up. In other words, you're trying to maximize your positives and minimize your negatives. And I know from my own experience, there's always that lurking, smoking gun. Someone, some event is going to trip you up in the last few days. And so people, the leadership tends to be rather anxious in these times because of that possibility.
Mr. Leon, we've got a lot of people talking to us online, and they've sent in some questions. And I just want to ask you one or two of the questions that's coming online on our Twitter page.
Sure.
People want to know what do you think of Helen Zille's tenure and style of leadership within the DA? And then also a question is she becoming more and more of a polarizing figure within the Democratic Alliance? What are your views on that?
Well, you know, I led the Democratic Alliance and the predecessor Democratic Party for 13 years. She's led it since I stood down as leader in 2007, so she's been at the helm for 6 or 7 years. Over time, any leader, and I include myself in this, does become polarizing because you start with a lot of goodwill and capital or money in the bank, and then it gets depleted just in the nature of events. And I guess that's exactly what's happened to Helen over time, because being in the leadership hot seat means you've got to make decisions, and over time you can't please everyone. In fact, an effective leader has often got to stand up against some interests, and then that tends to count against you. So I guess, over time she would attract negatives, as any leader would, and she's actually been in that leadership position longer than Jacob Zuma's been in his. And I think there have been some signals that after the election there'll be some leadership rearrangement. In fact, the leadership of South Africa's political parties is actually quite old, given the, except for Malema, of course, given the relative youth of our population. And I suspect across the political spectrum, the leadership of the various parties will refresh itself after the election.
Can I take you back a couple of months? I want to ask you your views on the PR disaster for the Democratic Alliance and Agang SA, with the merger that went on and then all the negative publicity that followed from that. How do you think that will play out in the elections next week?
Well, Eben, I think there are two aspects. The one is, you're quite right, it was a complete disaster. I mean, it lasted less than a week. There was no due diligence done by the DA on the essential terms and conditions of that proposal. And from Mampela Rampili's point of view, I don't know what she was thinking, quite frankly. In terms of the result, from the DA point of view, just looking at the polls without anything else at my disposal, I think it's got no effect on the DA result, in the sense that whatever the DA voted, and I think most of them were pretty unimpressed with how that played itself out, they appear to have discounted that and will support the DA. From the Agang point of view, I think it really is a major setback, because they will get very, very few seats. I'll be very surprised if there are more than 4 Agang MPs in Parliament. That means about 1% of the vote. And they will not be a factor in our politics going forward. So I think it's cost Agang much more than it's cost the DA. But I suppose from the opposition point of view, I think there's always a desire among opposition voters to have a form of opposition unity rather than fragmentation. So there might be some disappointment. But I don't think it's going to have an impact on the voting intentions of DA supporters.
Do you think it's had an effect on sort of squabbling and leadership issues within the party, especially amongst the black leaders of the Democratic Alliance?
Well, I don't know about that. I've had the opportunity at their request to engage quite closely with the two of the leaders of the Democratic Alliance who are emerging and who happen to be black. The one is Lindiwe Mazibuko, who's the parliamentary leader, and the other is their Gauteng candidate for Premier, Musi Maimane. And, I think they're bright, personable, committed people. Whether that's going to play itself out in some kind of contest, well, I only know what I read about. And I guess any political party which is relevant remains contested terrain at the top of its leadership tree. But, that's something that the party needs to put second. What they need to put first is if they do well in the election, if they don't do well, what are they going to do over the next 5 years? Because I think everyone concedes, short of some earthquake that we're unaware of, that the African National Congress is going to be re-elected at a national level by a pretty hefty margin, might be somewhat less than they got last time. And the question for the opposition, and the DA is incontestably the principal opposition party, is what are we going to do over the next 5 years, not just to put ourselves in a stronger position electorally, but to make our message not just appealing, but coherent and contrasting to the narrative that's coming from the governing party. Because I think if there isn't clear blue water between the ruling party and its principal opposition, then one's got to say it's just a choice between personalities rather than a difference of, significant party programs. And if and I'm not there, so I'm preaching from the outside, if I were in the DA leadership, I would spend a lot more time thinking about the messaging and the program rather than, if we have leader X or leader Y. Because I think our own history in South Africa has proven that it's not just about the person at the top, although that is important. It's also about the program underneath that person that will determine the success or the failure of the party or indeed the country.
I wanted to ask you about the constituency of the DA and in this pursuit of the black vote, or increasing the black vote within the DA, things like land issues and these things have come up. Do you think there's a chance that we'll see an alienation factor by the DA's constituency, the more conservative people within the party, when we get to the polls next week?
Well, I think there's a misapprehension that somehow if you're white, coloured, or Indian, a minority, you're conservative, and if you're black, you're very progressive, because that's inherent in not just your question, but that general assumption. Of course, complete nonsense, actually. You've got social liberals who are white, gay people, activists, for example. You've got very, very conservative people who happen to be black, and then you've got a mixture of those in all groups. So I don't think that race determines your ideology in this or any other country. But I think there are certain interests which attach to communities, which, of course, do come up from time to time. And because of South Africa's extraordinary racial history, that obviously has an ethnic fault line. So, I'm pretty sure that there are tensions that do reveal themselves. We had that, what Helen Zille herself described as a plane crash, when the DA flip-flopped on employment equity last year, whether they were in favour of it, then they were against it. And I think that there is some tension between, if you like, the traditional group of DA supporters and the new group, and the group that the party wants to reach in order to expand its electoral tension. And I think the same, strangely enough, is true of the African National Congress, though it's much bigger in the sense that it consists of different factions, wings, and ideologies, and that is true of any political party that reaches a certain critical mass. So in other words, if you're pretty small, you can be, and I know because I started off leading the party, it was a 7 MP party, and then I left, it was 57 MPs, and now it's about 80, so it's much bigger.
The progression.
But I do know that actually, when you're small, you can be pretty cohesive. When you get bigger, you do have all these tensions. Now, and differences, and that's inevitable with growth. How you manage them and mediate them, of course, is the essential question.
Finally, Mr. Leon, on a personal level, I know you feel like you're probably a little bit on the outside looking in, but who are you voting for next week?
Well, it would be rather self-defeating if I didn't vote for the party that I committed most of my life to building up, the DA. But I do think the most important thing about this election is that people exercise not just their democratic choice, but do so free of any other considerations. Who's going to do the best for you? So I'm a bit, someone said the difference between bacon and egg is that the chicken is involved, but the pig is committed. So I'm pretty much a pig in that sense, because rather than elegant, because I was so much part of the opposition movement in this country. But I hope people will go to the polls, first of all. And secondly, I really hope that they will think about the issues before they vote, think about the country they want, and then vote accordingly. Because, everyone's vote back in 1994 actually built South Africa to where it is today. And the critical thing is that we must keep building.
Mr. Leon, thank you very much for joining us, giving us unique insights into what will be an exciting week in South Africa the next week to come. Thank you very much. That's the former leader of the Democratic Alliance, Tony Leon, joining us live from Cape Town. Now, South Africans living abroad will continue to vote today ahead of the elections next week. Expats in New Zealand got the ball rolling when they began voting after 9 last night. That, of course, South African time. Today, it's the turn of South Africans living in the United Kingdom, who will be able to cast their ballots at the High Commission in London. Just over 26,000 South Africans have registered to vote abroad. They can only vote in the national election and not the provincial ones. Well, let's take a look now at what you are talking about on social media. Of course, the expats voting very much on people's minds. Green Hermit says, SA has done well in the past 20 years. Which other country let you vote abroad? Countdown had begun. 7 May is here for us. Proudly South African, says Green Hermit. Sarah Kimani, our very own Sarah Kimani, East African correspondent. The right to vote was won through blood and tears. We should not take it for granted. A voter here tells me. That is Sarah Kimani talking about voting abroad and voting in Kenya. That is Melly B says, chatting with Pops about how nice it'd be to go home and stay there in a safer nation free from corruption. And then we have a picture from Sarah Kimani. South Africans living in Kenya prepare to cast their ballots in Nairobi. Vote abroad, SABC News. There you have the ballot box, voting booth it is, at the South African High Commission in Kenya. That's courtesy of Sarah Kimani, and there you have the finger markings of those that have voted. That is from Voldy Carlos, who is also in Kenya. Catherine van Rensburg voted in Nairobi this morning. Will you make your mark? Is the question. Another picture there from Sarah Kimani, poll officials inside the voting station in Nairobi. That is SABC News, of course. Vote abroad. You can send us your contributions to @SABC Newsroom on Twitter. Pictures, videos, we love it. If it's good, we put it up just like that. Let's just now go to our other platform, which is the Facebook page. Of course, after the break, we'll speak to Data-Driven Insights Africa about media coverage on the 2014 elections. All the latest statistics are uploaded on our page, but we speak more about it after the break. South Africans living overseas are eligible to vote throughout today, 1 week ahead of the elections next week. The story is up on our page if you want more on that. Then the South African Insurance Crime Bureau says 4 billion rands worth of stolen and hijacked vehicles left the country's shores last year. More on that story on our Facebook page. You can get all that details right there. On this day in 1945, holed up in a bunker under his headquarters in Berlin, Adolf Hitler commits suicide by swallowing a cyanide capsule and shooting himself in the head. Soon after, Germany unconditionally surrendered to the Allied forces, ending Hitler's dreams of a 1,000-year Reich. On YouTube, we found the BBC's first radio broadcast announcing Hitler's death 1 day after. The photograph is the front cover of the American wartime newspaper Stars and Stripes that was published on May the 2nd in 1945.
This is London calling. Here is a news flash. The German radio has just announced that Hitler is dead. I'll repeat that. The German radio has just announced that Hitler...
Well, that was on May the 2nd, 1945, the announcement that, German Chancellor at the time, Adolf Hitler, committed suicide, which brought an end to the Second World War. This is Newsroom. We'll be back after a short commercial break.
SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Mommy, where does meat come from?
That's a good question, my darling. All our meat must come from healthy animals. It's our duty to make sure that the meat we eat is healthy and nutritious. Before slaughter, animals must be inspected at registered abattoirs to make sure that the meat is healthy enough to be consumed by humans. Only inspected meat is marked with a stamp of approval. That is why it's important to ask our butchery where the meat comes from and to look for the stamp of approval when buying meat.
Mommy, where do babies come from?
You ask too many questions, my darling.
Remember, uninspected meat as not safe meat. Your health is your responsibility. For more information, contact the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries at 012 319 7515.
Molweni, nda, dumelang, assalamualaikum, namaste, goeiemorgen, Jumbo Africa, and a very warm welcome to AM News here on SABC News Channel 404. The Basic Education Minister, Angie Motshekga, has dismissed the renewed Limpopo textbook saga as a storm in a teacup.
They have to collect books the previous year. And it's actually the very principals, if that's what they told me was true, there'll be ill discipline because they were supposed to have collected books so that state doesn't buy books because we don't buy the same books every year. A book is supposed to last for 3 years. So they are supposed to collect them so they don't run short.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom on SABC News. The 2014 elections are a week away now, with 2 decades past. It's no surprise that within those 20 years, a lot has changed in our society, especially if you think about it, the way we consume news. In 1994, you weren't exposed to the amount of social media platforms as we're exposed to today. Political parties have in the last year already made their presence known on social media, and the 2014 elections will certainly also represent. Now, data-driven Statistics Africa will be releasing media monitoring statistics surrounding the elections to give us more of an insight just how the elections are representing on the new age platforms. We are joined by Tonya Kuri from DDI. Good morning, Tonya. Thank you for joining us again.
Good morning, Eben. Thanks for being here.
I want to start with the statistics that you guys are about to release or have just released. Just give us a little insight as to the sort of trends.
So we released the statistics this morning, so we started a week before the election, and we'll monitor it during the course of the election. And I think it was relevant because most of the time, most of the international countries have started going to their booths or their polls, etc. So what we do is we monitor 6.2 million social networks, 60,000 online newspapers, 69 radio and television stations in this country, and then we put it all into a very smart system called Newsdesk, where we then analyze what is said about any subject in general. But in this instance, we've monitored the elections, the different parties in the elections, and also the prominent leaders in the media coverage. And what we found is quite interesting, Eben. I mean, Julius Malema and Jacob Zuma are neck and neck in the past 24 hours for coverage. We're finding also that most of the parties are using Nkandla as a method to get their message across.
The angle, sort of.
Yes, and the ANC is constantly batting the Nkandla card, so it's coming through all the time.
What are these charts showing us then?
Well, what we've got at the top of the screen there is the leaders in the past 24 hours. We've just taken the big three, Zuma, Zille, Malema, and you'll see there that Helen Zille sitting at 12.36% of the coverage, Malema at 46% and Zuma at 41%. So Julius Malema trumping Zuma in the past 24 hours. And then if you look at the past 7 days, you'll see that Julius Malema is really a big conversation maker in the media. Obviously, I mean, there's a lot to say about Julius Malema. So that coming in at almost 39% of the time, and that's in the past 7 days. And then what we did is there's so many political parties, Eben. I think there's 45 of them, aren't there? So what we did is we took like the top 10 in the news, okay, and we put them on one graph in 24 hours and then again in 7 days. And what you'll find is the ANC, from 7 days to 24, their coverage has dropped by a good few, 3 or 4%. And then the EFF and the DA gaining ground in the news platforms overnight. So that makes quite interesting reading. But we've got some more for you as well. There's quite a bit to discuss about Nkandla. So what we did was we took each party And we analysed what their main messages were out to the rest of the world, okay? Yeah. And like we put on job creation, service delivery, BEE, fracking was even on there, yeah. And then Nkandla. And every party, Nkandla comes up trumps.
So Nkandla is the sort of angle that all political parties are hoping to use in the run-up this election. And what's the response from the public to this kind of electioneering? And what does the numbers show us?
Well, the numbers, I mean, we also did the Oscar Pistorius trial, as you'll remember. Yeah. So the numbers don't even come close in comparison to something like the Oscar Pistorius trial. But the numbers are pretty high, and they fluctuate daily. And it depends what message is being sent out, how quickly people respond, and whether they're taking on that angle or not. I think we'll see a lot more conversation in the next few days.
In the next couple of days and run up. Now, you mentioned the Oscar Pistorius trial. On Monday, it restarts again.
Yes.
And the two are sort of going to go. They're sort of going to go head to head against each other. Yeah. What's the expectation there, and what do the early sort of trends show us?
Well, I think it's so interesting because we watched Oscar hit in any 1 hour 12,000 unique articles. So like a massive media frenzy out there.
This is international?
Internationally, yeah. And then we saw it flatline. So in the past week, like, it's dead. There's hardly any conversation about Oscar Pistorius, and that just shows that when Oscar's in court, that's when people start having the conversation. Yeah. So yes, on Monday, it's going to be a very interesting comparison to see Oscar versus the elections. We've done that conversation before, specifically when Nkandla came out, when the commission report was released by Thuli Madonsela. Yeah. So when that came out, we compared the two, and even then, the elections didn't make any impact against the Oscar Pistorius trial. So I do expect the same to happen again. I expect next week Oscar's going to take the limelight.
Well, we will wait and see, but I'm sure a lot of people will be, at least locally, be interested in the elections and the last-minute electioneering. But thank you very much for joining us. Very nice insights that you always bring us, Tonya.
Thank you, Eben.
That is Data-Driven Insights. Tonya Curry giving us an insight into the election. And then, of course, next week, Oscar Pistorius restarts. So that will take a lot of the column space throughout the South African media landscape. Now, the IFP has denied allegations that it colluded with the ANC to stop the work of the National Assembly's ad hoc committee. The committee was appointed by Speaker Max Sisulu earlier this month to look into President Jacob Zuma's response to the Public Protector's report on Nkandla. The committee decided, with the vote of the ANC members together with an IFP member, to defer the matter to the next parliament.
IFP MP Naren Singh's support for the ANC's proposal to refer the Nkandla matter to the next parliament raised a few eyebrows. Today, Singh explained his party's reasons.
This in no way means that we are colluding with the ruling party, as some media reports have accused us of doing. We have taken this position because we want more out of this process. We want real answers for the citizens of our country.
But the Freedom Front Plus has a different opinion.
My concern is, how can we expect Parliament or anybody else in future to take Parliament seriously in terms of oversight and to report to Parliament if this is the kind of approach?
COPE has also clarified its decision to boycott the ad hoc committee.
By being part of that committee, we ourselves now became complicit in acting contrary to the Constitution. So that's why we said, look, we will not take part in that thing.
Meanwhile, the Democratic Alliance says it is seeking legal advice on the ANC's alleged blocking of the ad hoc committee's work. Lukhanya Khalada, SABC News, Parliament.
Yes, the scrapping of the ad hoc committee to look into President Jacob Zuma's response to the Public Protector's report has been strongly rejected, really, by opposition parties. The move has raised more questions than answers as to how serious the ruling party about corruption and protecting state resources. Public Protector Thuli Madonsela found Zuma and his family had unduly benefited from security upgrades to his Nkandla residence to the value of 246 million rand. From Parliament, we are joined by the SABC's political reporter, Lukhanya Khalada. Good morning, Lukhanya.
Good morning, Eben.
What are the implications of the latest move on the Nkandla report?
Well, Eben, the The latest move basically means that the ad hoc committee is now no longer. It was supposed to have completed its report today, but obviously the move in earlier this week meant that it is no longer. Whether or not it will be reconstituted in the next parliament, in the 5th parliament, that will only then be constituted after the May 7th elections, remains to be seen. Opposition parties say they will obviously then write to the Speaker. Whether that would be Max Sisulu still, we don't know. But opposition parties are saying they will write to the next Speaker, and they will obviously want to put this issue back on Parliament's agenda. But whether or not the next Speaker will agree to have this matter on the table, it remains to be seen. So right now it's all up in the air, and nothing really is for certain. Eben?
Lucanio, I've just spoken to an expert who told us that, in the online space, all political parties are using Nkandla as their sort of key argument in the run-up to the election. Just tell us about the response of all these political parties then to the goings-on of this week. There must be some level of outrage and a lot of different comments that you've received.
Eben, I think the word outrage is the best way to describe the reactions of political parties. I think all of them, especially the opposition parties, all of them are really outraged. They say that they can't actually believe that something like this would happen. And they all blame the ANC. They're saying that the ANC is the one that has delayed this process right from the start, right from the get-go, when Speaker Max Sisulu initially set up the ad hoc committee, and the Democratic Alliance, for instance, would go on and they'd say, well, on this day they did this, on this day they did this. When they took 8 days to give the Speaker the names of who they wanted to sit on the committee, and obviously that delayed the work of the committee. I think all the opposition parties, they really, the word to use is outraged. And what the IFP did yesterday, for instance, and the IFP is part of the Collective for Democracy. And in the package that we did for last night, and the one that played just before this interview, its partners in the collective, especially the Freedom Front Plus, could not understand why the IFP would vote in favor of the ANC's motion to have this matter deferred to the 5th Parliament. They just couldn't understand, because they said, look, if we had used whatever little time we had to work on this committee, we could have had some form of response to the public to say, actually, as Parliament, this is what we were able to do. And they also wanted, this committee to be extended. They wanted it to work right up until the 6th of May, which is the day before the elections, because Parliament then rises at midnight on the 6th of May. But obviously, I mean, they're very disappointed, and many of them are quite outraged. Eben?
And quickly, you've got 30 seconds to tell us how the matter will proceed then after the election.
Well, opposition parties say they will write to the Speaker to try and get him to reconstitute this committee. Whether or not that happens remains to be seen, because the next Parliament cannot be holden, or this current Parliament, the 4th Parliament, cannot tell the next Parliament what it must put on its agenda. So it remains to be seen whether or not the ad hoc committee to look in.
Us today, that's our reporter from Parliament Live. It is Lucanio Kalatu. Matundra must be hailed as a true unionist if it was NUM with its board members of from the mine strike. Lauren Edwards said, "Who are too much wrestling these days?" A chant of no, the strike on our Twitter page. It is at SABC Newsroom. That's where you can live, of course. Yesterday, economic freedom fighters supporters gathered outside the SABC here in Johannesburg to protest over what they call the SABC's ban on showing its election advertisement. Our producer, Anine Dormel, was out in the crowd. Let's just have a look at some of the pictures that she took. Of course, the photos are all available on our Facebook page as well as a short little video of, well, the day was quite long and some of the supporters were rather tired early doors. The police were out in full force. There you see some of the banners as they're marching on the SABC yesterday. These pictures courtesy. There is the fearless leader, Julius Malema, leading the people to the SABC, if you were, yesterday. In true military fashion it was. These pictures, of course, all available on our on our Facebook page. If you want more updates on that, if you want to look at some of the other stuff that's been going on around the news, that's where you can get it, on our Facebook page. We're going to take a short commercial break. We'll be back just now. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Mommy, where does meat come from?
That's a good question, my darling. All our meat must come from healthy animals. It's our duty to make sure that the meat we eat is healthy and nutritious. Before slaughter, animals must be inspected at registered abattoirs to make sure that the meat is healthy enough to be consumed by humans. Only inspected meat is marked with a stamp of approval. That is why it's important to ask our butchery where the meat comes from, and to look for the stamp of approval when buying meat.
Mommy, where do babies come from?
You ask too many questions, my darling.
Remember, uninspected meat is not safe meat. Your health is your responsibility. For more information, contact the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries at 012-319-7515.
Welcome back. This is Newsroom on SABC News. Let's take a quick look at the news headlines. South Africans living abroad will continue to vote today ahead of the elections next week. The Electoral Court has ruled that a full inquiry will be held on Friday in an application seeking the resignation of IEC chairperson Pansy Tekula. The application was brought by 5 opposition parties who are demanding her resignation ahead of next week's elections. The Zimbabwean opposition party, Movement for Democratic Change, has voted to expel party rebels led by Secretary General Tendai Biti, who staged a dramatic bid to oust leader Morgan Tsvangirai over the weekend. Now we move to Mpumalanga, where more than 50 rape cases were reported over the Easter weekend. According to police in the province, the worrying factor is that some of the perpetrators are the biological fathers of the rape victims. Police say that in one of the cases, it appeared that a father raped his 18-year-old daughter since the age of 6. Well, we are joined now by Benita Null from Childline in Mpumalanga, who will talk a little bit more about this. Good morning, Benita. Can you hear me?
Good morning, Eben.
Benita, a worrying statistic that's come out is that how often we hear cases where fathers are actually the men who rape their daughters. Is this a common thing?
I think this is a very underreported thing. I think it's merely the ears of the hippo, being from the Kruger National Park province, that we are seeing. So I don't think that there is clear statistics, but it is very concerning that it's coming more and more to the front. I think the vulnerability of our children is highlighted through these reports. And the reason that I can attach to that from Childline's side is that the children is vulnerable because they are abused by people that they trust. If we look at recent statistics, in the past few years, about 55% of crimes against children was sexual crimes. And of these, 30% was children below the age of 10. So they really don't have a voice. They trust people. They're being groomed. They feel obliged to protect their family environment. And then you don't hear about it. So, yes, the statistics is alarming. And in a way, it makes you feel good that it's coming forward, because then we can start addressing it.
Now, 50 reported rape cases over one long weekend in the province is really bad news. Do you believe enough is being done in your province to protect children?
I know that there is a lot of programs going on. We work as Childline with the Child Protection Forum, and we also develop our own child protection forums in rural communities. However, the violence that takes place is something that we cannot control, and sometimes it is a period of building up until something like a rape happens. Rape is not always a sexual offense. It could be about power, it could be about violence. So you wouldn't know what happened over this weekend, how many alcohol abuse was part of this, and then there was a available soft target and they got raped in the process.
What about conviction rates, Benita? Are you happy with the conviction rates of these criminals?
No. I am not. I think that children are more vulnerable. I don't think the system supports enough. We've had cases here in Nelson that drags on and on and on. And the criminal justice system just allow loopholes and technicalities to come in the way. And the person who suffers the most is a child who goes 4 years after she's been raped and still can't get clear therapy or can't get closure on this issue because she has to go back and listen to testifications and to all of the facts over and over, be confronted by the individual. I know these processes that protect the children, but they're not allowed to move on with their life and find closure, heal, have a safety plan, and continue with a healthy life, becoming a South African citizen in the full sense of the word.
Benita, I want to ask you about, say if I suspect a child of being raped by a father or a family member that I see, what are the signs that I should then be looking out for before I raise the flag, of course?
Okay. Children becoming withdrawn is some of the first things that we are seeing. And actually we are having a program at Childline where we teach this to teachers as well, because I think children is mostly exposed in schools and they spend the most of their time in schools. You can see withdrawn, a change in behavior, displeasure with being touched, or an overly clingy type of behavior, wanting to please you the whole time. Children that starts masturbating in front of others, exposing inappropriate sexual conduct for the age. We find little small children that's not supposed to be developed sexually at the level of actions that we observe from them. So you have to then understand that that child has been exposed to content, maybe seeing his dad's movies that shouldn't have been lying around, or observing his parents or whatever. So observe then behavior going back, self-care, deteriorating, that the child just feel I'm not worthy anymore, and keeping a secret, the child distancing himself because he feels that then he would be less safe, and he wouldn't put in that difficult position to expose a father who is supposed to be the trust person, the protector of the house, the person who provides for the house, and now you are the one who's going to put him in jail. So there's such an emotional plight on children that I don't think that they are able to deal with at the ages that this stuff happened to them.
Well, thank you very much for joining us today. Benita Null from Childline, joining us from Mpumalanga, Nelspruit really, in Mpumalanga, giving us a little update. Now, for a blast from the past. Some of you might remember Clout, the South African millionaire selling all-girl rock group formed in 1977 and best known for their song Substitute. Well, we're joined by one of the members today, but before we get to them, here's a little something to refresh your memory.
You've been loyal, true Yes, Cindy Alter, the former front lady of South African all-girl group Clout, joins us in studio today to tell us more about her newly released single, Thrive, her first solo single in over a decade. Cindy obtained global accomplishment with Clout over 3 decades ago, and their single, Substitute, became a chart topper in 10 countries across the world. The band had a string of very successful international hits, including Save Me and Under Fire, and has sold to date in the region of 12 million albums. Cindy, welcome on the show.
Hi, Katrine. Lovely to be here.
What an honor to have you on the show.
What would you know about that? You're so young.
I've been researching Clout this entire week,
Really?
and I actually do know Substitute. My mother was a big fan.
I bet you. They used to play them at parties.
And it was always on the radio when I was a kid. So, no, I actually do know a thing or two from Clout. Listen, it's been quite a ride since Clout, and now you're back with your new, your first solo single, Thrive.
Yes.
Tell us a bit more about this.
You know, I've been wanting to do something solo for a while. I've always been with bands, and I just thought, you know, I've got a whole bunch of songs that I wanted to put out there. Whenever I would play them at a little gig or something, everybody said, oh, man, I want to hear that song. I love that song. So I thought, you know what, it's time to do that. I'm going to put it out. And Thrive's also... It's very much, I think, for the times right now. We're all just surviving because things are tough, and we're all just working so hard to make everything work. And we're not thriving. We need to thrive and to love what we're doing, and for everybody to be a part of that.
The single takes us back over the years. You've been all over the world. Why end up back in South Africa?
A funny story that I was living in America. I was in Los Angeles for 15 years. I was very happy in LA. I loved America. And after I got sick, I got leukemia, and I had a bone marrow transplant, and I went through quite a lot of stuff. And I thought, you know what, I need to stop this rushing around. I am such a doer and a mover and a shaker, and I'm always on the go. I think this was a warning to me. It was like, stop, lie down, chill out, and actually get back to yourself and find out who you are and what you want out of life. And I found that the way I would do that best is to go home and to start again.
Now, how has it affected your career and the music that you're writing these days?